David Cho es el propietario y director ejecutivo de una pequeña empresa llamada Tire Industry Research. Tiene 30 años de experiencia en la industria global de neumáticos. TIRes publica un boletín semanal sobre la industria de neumáticos en China, así como informes mensuales sobre la industria mundial de neumáticos. Su compañía publicó recientemente un informe de investigación del mercado titulado Sostenibilidad en la industria de neumáticos 2016, y antes de eso la compañía publicó China Tire Industry 2015-2018. También dirige la conferencia Tire Technology, la conferencia líder en el mundo sobre tecnología de neumáticos. Tiene lugar en Alemania cada febrero. Regularmente asesora a los principales ejecutivos y estrategas corporativos sobre el desarrollo futuro de la industria mundial de neumáticos. David se presenta regularmente en conferencias y eventos en Asia, América y Europa. Y hoy tenemos el placer de tenerlo aquí como un exhibidor con muchísima información. Bienvenido.
Bueno, la China está impactando toda la industria nuestra y muchas otras industrias. Yo creo que la persona que tiene más información en el mundo sobre lo que es el mercado de neumáticos, llantas, sobre la China es David. David tiene un programa que uno compra reportes que él envía, y yo creo que todos nosotros, no estoy recibiendo comisión, pero sí información, todos nosotros que estamos averiguando, tratando de averiguar qué está pasando en China, qué está pasando con esta empresa, quién está ganando dinero, quién va a salir, quién no va a salir, él lo sabe. Él tiene un equipo en la China y esa información a mi empresa nos ayuda semanalmente para saber qué viene en el futuro. Yo quisiera que, si hay tiempo después, ustedes pueden hacerle preguntas a David, porque la China es una realidad, para mí es una realidad buena. Los neumáticos que nosotros vendemos son fabricados en China. La China ha mejorado mucho sus productos y esa es parte de la vida mundial de la industria de neumáticos. Entonces le recomiendo a David, que tiene mucha información que nos sirve.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very, very much. That's a very kind introduction. The slightly embarrassing thing is that, it looks as though the screen is not working. I'm going to be talking a bit about China. For the people who've been here for the last few years, I've given some background. So the presentation this year is going to be a little bit more about the recent changes in China, what's happening now, and maybe a bit of what might happen in the future. This is what we do. I produce a weekly newsletter, as Gus said, that talks about China. I produce a monthly that talks about events in the industry around the world, and that's it. Global tire production. This chart basically describes the tire industry in a nutshell. We see rubber growth of around about we see tyre growth around about 1.5% per year. We see rubber growth at about 3% per year, and that means tyres are getting bigger. We see that China is this thing here. The other countries are down here, and that means that China consumes about 40% of the rubber that is used to make tyres. So China's producing about 40% of the world's tyres, which is quite a lot. Here we go. Global tyre production, more or less, that's China. So we've seen a change. Since about 2015 or so, the production in China has leveled off. And that means China is entering a phase of consolidation. It's turning into a higher tech production country. We're seeing in the last 6 months, and it will accelerate in the next 6 months, we're seeing consolidation of the business. We're seeing the smaller companies getting bigger. We're seeing small companies going bust. And if there's one thing I would say to you, if you buy from China, if you do business with any tyre companies in China, just watch that credit risk. The suppliers that I know in China are putting certain companies on cash-only deals because they're very concerned that there will be companies going bust. So be a little bit careful about credit risk. One of the interesting things is this is total global revenues, and in 2016 it's down by 25%. If you take the top 4, they're also down by about 25%. In 2017, in fact, it's kicked up a bit. It's kicked up by about 6%. It's back up to the 2015 levels. And that's because prices, as you all know, have increased. Prices at these companies, the small companies, sorry, the world's biggest, have increased less than these companies. So what we're seeing is no impact on brand. We're seeing the global revenues decrease by 25% and the majors decrease by 25%. So it's really a commodity business. And if you want to look at why prices have decreased, it's because of this. This is the input price. If you're interested in chemicals, and some of you are, this is the price of natural rubber in red. This is the price of crude oil in pale blue. And this, in dark blue, is the price of butadiene. So it's quite interesting to note that butadiene doesn't depend on oil prices, it depends on rubber prices. Okay, enough of the input. We do this every year. We look at the total size of the small companies in China, and they add up to about the same size as Bridgestone. This year, as I say, the revenues of Chinese have increased by about 20%. And the revenue of Bridgestone has increased by about 6%. So in 2017, we'll see China just a little bit bigger than Bridgestone in the States. So at first glance, China's had quite a good year. And these are the top tire makers in China. And you can see the companies there. You can see growth in this column. This is the growth of 2017 over 2016. You can see figures of 23%, 25%, 30%. That's in sales revenue. And those of you who buy and sell tyres, you know that the price of Chinese tyres has gone up quite a lot in the last 12 months or so. If you look at profit, it's much less. The profitability of Chinese tyre companies has gone down. So in 2017, it was a really bad year. The average margins were only about 2 or 3%. And if you listen to the Chinese companies themselves, they say that most of that 2 or 3% did not come from making tyres. It came from government support, or it came from land subsidies, or it came from compensation for various things that they've done. So the thing that kept these companies in profit, and about a third of them actually made losses, but out of all the top companies, most of them were in profit, but only just because they got subsidies from the government. And those are the things that kept them in profit. So ostensibly it's been quite a good year. As you can see, the green things show profit. A couple of years ago, all of them were sorry, green things showed increase in revenue. A couple of years ago, all of them showed decreases in revenue. Yeah, David Stevens, first of all, talked about Trump's tariffs. I don't know what's going to happen. We think it's probably a negotiating position. Mr. Trump claims he's a good negotiator. I think probably the Chinese have read his book, and so they're even better negotiators. But I have no idea what's going to happen. What I do know is that for steel cord that goes into tyres in the United States doesn't produce sufficient steel, or it doesn't produce steel of sufficient quality to make steel cord, to make the reinforcement steel cord for tyres. Now, there's wire rod that you need to make that stuff is imported from Japan or Europe or elsewhere. That's subject to the tariffs. Steel cord is not subject to the tariffs. That means that the manufacturing factories in Illinois and elsewhere, the steel drawing cord, the steel wire manufacturing factories of Beckett and Kisswire and others are now at a disadvantage, and they may well close if these tariffs come in. So what we're seeing is Trump's tariffs having precisely the opposite effect from what he intended. Now, whether that will be sorted out or not, I have no idea. But as I say, I think it's a negotiating situation. But what it does mean is that any companies which have a global position are able to move their manufacturing around the world. And what we expect to see is a lot more cross-border mergers and acquisitions in the tyre industry and also in others, simply to give companies more flexibility. Because we're seeing tariffs from Europe, we're seeing tariffs from India, we're seeing tariffs from the United States. We think that globalization will become a much more significant issue as the world becomes less free trade and more protectionist. I do want to talk about tariffs. This is US imports of PCR, and this is when Trump imposed, sorry, not Trump, when the US Obama imposed duties. And since then, this low one down here is China. You could say that those tariffs have worked, because imports from China have all but disappeared. But if you look at the total imports from Southeast Asia, which are these sort of browny, orangey colours, they stay pretty much the same. And that reflects what we see happening, which is that the Chinese tyre manufacturers have just gone offshore. They've gone to Thailand, they've gone to Vietnam, to Indonesia, and we're seeing more and more of that happening. As Western countries, United States, Europe, elsewhere, start to impose duties and tariffs on Chinese manufacturers, we're seeing much more globalization. And the fact is that those factories are really good. If you look at a Chinese-owned tyre factory in Thailand for passenger car or truck tyres, they are really good factories. Because the companies have bought the best equipment, they brought in consultants to manage those things, and so the effect of tariffs has been to effectively make local businesses less competitive, because when the Chinese go offshore, they pay to get the best equipment, the best technology, the best automation, and so they produce much better tyres. And the tyres coming out of the Thailand factories are really good, both truck tyres and car tyres. They're much better than the ones made in China. And I think that means tariffs have a counterproductive effect, because it not only means that we get this kind of effect here of going offshore, but the tyres coming in are better. And I'm going to look at the EU. We know that the EU from February started asking importers to register their tyres. This is going to have a big deal. In March, the latest numbers for which they're available, we didn't see much of a decline. We saw a little bit of a decline. We did not see a big peak ahead of this thing, which is what we saw in China, in the US. If you look at the US, we saw a big peak in imports just before the duties came in. But in Europe, we didn't see that. One or two importers did import large numbers of tyres and have stopped to take them through until, this is truck tyres, have stopped to take them through until about November, December of this year. But the vast majority didn't. And there's still quite a lot of confusion about what the EU is actually doing. We know what the numbers are, but we don't know when those duties will be imposed. We think probably from February the 10th, but we don't know, because they deliberately avoided saying. We see an increase in Taiwan. This is imports to the EU from Taiwan. And you can see that in February and March they increased dramatically. That number, incidentally, is only 1% of the Chinese number. So it's not a big deal at the moment. But I'm just a little bit curious as to why that's happened at exactly the time that the imports, the duties were effectively announced. We're seeing a lot more imports coming in from Turkey. We're seeing from Russia. So what's happening is that the wholesalers are looking around for sources of supply outside of China. And what we think probably will happen, bearing in mind what David said earlier on, is that the Chinese suppliers will try to ship volume to the United States. Because if those factories are no longer producing for Europe, and they're certainly not, then they'll start shifting that volume to the United States, to Central America, to Middle East and so forth. So you're probably going to find a lot more supply of Chinese-made tyres coming into these markets as those factories seek a destination for the things that they can no longer make for Europe. And I'm sure you've seen that already. This is US imports of TBR. I'm going to skip over that. I talked about overseas expansions by the Chinese companies, and there's a list of them. These red ones are the ones that have just been announced in 2018. I've got, Kumho, Double Star and Kumho. Is anyone interested in this? There's a lot of confusion out in the market about what is happening. And as I understand it, there is no deal yet. It's very likely to happen. So Kumho is going to issue 134 million new shares, which is 85% of the current number at issue. Double Star will be given all of those, or will acquire all of those, in exchange for putting around about it's 46 million, isn't it, into the company. That money will be available to improve the company. Sorry, it's 460 million. Double Star will hold 46%. The Korean Development Bank will hold 7%. So between the two of them, they've got a controlling stake. And what's happening now is that the Korean Development Bank has put a bunch of hatchet men in charge of Kumho around the world, and they're cutting costs in order to make Kumho Tire look like a profitable business when Double Star eventually takes it over, probably end of this month, start of next month. Kumho Tire's got a board meeting on the 7th of July, at which they'll confirm the shareholder status. And I think that's when they'll issue new shares and bring Double Star on board. Okay. I just want to talk a little bit about what happened in the carbon black business. Not because you're interested in carbon black, but because it's the only model we've got for what is likely to happen in the Chinese tyre industry. We saw back in about 18 months ago, there was massive pollution all across China. And President Xi brought in new environmental regulations that said you've got to basically be clean, you mustn't have too many emissions. And the idea was that the local population who could smell anything or see black smoke were to report any such factory to the authorities, and the authorities would come in and just check whether they were compliant or not, and none of them was, except the Westerners. But the point is that we saw all the small factories closed. And we think that there's roughly a 40% reduction in the number of carbon black factories upstream in 5 years or so. And we think that's almost certainly going to happen in the tyre companies. We think that the number will fall from about 600 to about 360. So we think that something like 250 factories are going to close. That's happening. We're seeing it right now. And I think, yeah, we're tracking all of those in our weekly newsletter. We think that within that consolidation, we'll see 4 poles. We'll see Wanli, Zhongqi, Aeolus and Pirelli, and Double Star. We're seeing large groups already emerging in Shandong. We're seeing Hongfeng has bought Wusen and Huzhou. We're seeing Qingyuan and Shanghai merging. So we're seeing a number of fairly large groups developing in the Shandong region. And we think that's going to develop as it's managed by the Chinese authorities. Excuse me. Yeah, I mentioned this thing. President Xi, he started off with an anti-corruption campaign in his first term. In his second term, it's environment, and that's moved on to health and safety. So companies in the last year had to deal with their environmental issues. In the next year, they're going to have to deal with health and safety in the workplace. And what this is doing is just piling more and more pressure on the small companies. The small companies who sort of duck and dive a bit, maybe they do a few deals under the table, maybe they get certificates that prove that they are valid just by paying a bit of money when they're not valid. We're seeing all of that putting more pressure on those small companies, so that eventually those small companies will just step back from the business and say, I can't handle this anymore, it's costing me too much. And that's driving consolidation. So it's not a forced thing, it's just that the government is putting more pressure on those companies to voluntarily step back. And they will, and they are. We're seeing that, some voluntarily, some are going into liquidation, and just last week we heard of a company where the authorities came in with bulldozers and just flattened the company because there were no assets. They couldn't auction the assets off, so they just flattened the company. Pretty brutal, but they can do that in China, even if they can't elsewhere. So the conclusions really are that consolidation is underway now. You need to be fairly clear about the companies you're dealing with. You need to be fairly clear about their financial strength, because the financial strength of the Chinese tyre industry is pretty shaky right now, and will continue to get more shaky over the next 6 to 12 months. We're seeing larger, stronger groups emerging. We're seeing overseas expansion. Management haven't really discussed, but we're seeing that management is gradually improving there. I mean, Chinese management is not that good. They've done well because they've had double-digit growth over the last 10 years or so, and they got rich, and the companies have got big. But they've only got rich because of that 10% growth. They haven't got rich because the managers are smart. What's happening now, as growth levels off, is that management has to get a lot smarter, a lot more international, and we're starting to see that. And that's pretty much it. So, thank you very much.
La pregunta que queremos saber todo. David, are Chinese tire prices going to go up or come down?
They're going to go up. Because of all of the up. But it's a fight between the importers and the companies. You guys don't want to pay more. You've already seen quite big increases over the last 12 months or so. And still there's enough competition out there that you guys can fight between this company and that. However, as I said, the tyre makers are only just in profit and not really, number one. Number two, there's now a structured system of fines for all tyre makers based on the number of, the amount of emissions, the amount of pollution they generate. Number three, their upstream suppliers of chemicals, of carbon black, of all sorts, also face those fines. And so those guys are putting their prices up. And as we've seen, those businesses have consolidated, which means that there isn't the same competition. So input prices are continuing to rise in China. Fines are increasing and so forth. So prices are definitely, the pressure is upwards. It just depends on how courageous you guys can be about resisting their desires to increase prices.
One more question, please.
No, first of all, does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So, after hearing this, I think everybody here should go buy tires outside now before the prices go up. We've been hearing, and tread rubber too. Stand up. Yes. Tú levanta. We've been hearing rumors from China that certain factories are closing because the Chairman Xi is going to go visit a certain region. What do you know about this?
This is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is a military defense organization that was started in Shanghai, but is meeting in Qingdao in Shandong this weekend, in fact. And because it's military defense, they want to ensure that the air is beautifully clean, that there's no threat of pollution, so they're stopping lots of industrial activity. Within 100 kilometers of Qingdao, almost everything without permits has stopped. That includes the port, to a certain extent it includes logistics, it includes a lot of tyre makers and upstream suppliers. Within 200 kilometers of Qingdao, you must have a permit and then you can work. Within 300 kilometers, which extends out to Dongying and Guangrao, there are restrictions. Maybe they're being forced to work 50% of the time, but there are restrictions. Outside of that, it's okay. So that means it's affecting Shandong province out as far as Dongying and Guangrao, but those cities are not too badly affected. Within Qingdao immediate region, basically it's a shutdown. That's for the last 10 days and it will continue probably until the middle of next week.